עכשיו המרצה השני הוא דוקטור דוד בסון, יו"ר אגודת האקדמאים יוצאי עיראק בישראל. הוא עזב את עיראק בשנת 1972 לאנגליה, שם למד הנדסה כימית באוניברסיטת מנצ'סטר וקיבל תוארי MA ודוקטור. הוא גם למד בלונדון לתואר MBA, עבד בתעשייה הקימית, בבנקאות ובפיננסים. בעשור האחרון נעשה פעיל בהפצת ההיסטוריה והתרבות של יהודי עיראק, והיה מעורב בפעילות ארגונים של יהודי עיראק. הוא כותב, מרצה ומתראיין למדיה הערבית העולמית והעולמית ובמסגרת אקדמית. בבקשה, דוקטור בסון.
Today I'm going to, will you excuse me that I'm going to speak in English? I'm going to speak in English, and the presentation is in English, but please, you can ask any questions. I'm going to concentrate on a period which is not very much known in Israel, and that is the Jewish intellectual that stayed in Iraq post the Tasqit. So let's set the scene. We have Iraq, sorry. Yeah, just עבר אחד. Okay, let's up in historical terms. Iraq, 1917, we are starting with, until 1932. The British Army, led by General Stanley Mood, enters Baghdad in 1917. Iraqi Jews in Baghdad take the lead in the administration of the new state. Iraq Kingdom established in 1921 with Faisal bin Sharif Hussein as the King of Iraq. Iraq under the British Mandate, 1922 to 1932, is the golden age for Iraqi Jews. Sasson Esquel, Minister of Finance, and Shamash School established in Baghdad in 1928. In the pioneering generation of 1917-1932, we referred at in some of the presentation. We just go into a few people like Zahion Edrei and Yaqub Sion published Yeshon in 1920 in Hebrew and Arabic. Salman Shina published Al-Masbah in 1924 to 29, which was closed by the Ministry of Interior. Salman Cohen and Shaul Haddad publishes Al-Burhan in 1928, and Anwar Shaul publishes Al-Hasid in 29 to 38, and eventually it was closed due to Nazi and national agitation. Jewish intellectual participating actively in the political and cultural life, Iraq gaining independence in 1932. These are the pioneering generation that we've heard about. Some of them you may have heard about, some of them may not. Suleiman Ambar, Salim Ishaq, Yaqub Muallim Nissim, Murad Mikhael, Ezra Haddad, Mir Haddad, Mneshi Zarur, and people like Anwar Shaul and Mir Basri and Estrena Abraham, the wife of Anwar Shaul, they basically stayed in Iraq after the Tasqit. Let's jump another step and now take Iraq in 1933 to 51. King Faisal dies in 1933. Ghazi ascends to the throne of Iraq and killed in a car accident in 1938. The Nazi rise to power in Germany in 1933. Arab nationalism, anti-British, anti-Zionism, disturbances in Palestine in 1936, and anti-Jewish Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini in Iraq. The army officers, the Golden Square, take power, Rashid Ali al-Gailani, Prime Minister. Farhud in June 1941. Iraqi Jews, liberal democracy, communism, or Zionism. They different ideas, but it's the seeds of the end. The Jewish state Israeli independence 1948, and the denationalizing law, which is the Tasqit, in March 1950. 95% of Iraqi Jews leave to Israel by 1952. There is those intellectuals that actually crossed and during this period contributed, and basically in most of the newspaper you will find them. Most of them actually immigrated to Israel, and actually in the first few years of the Israeli radio, they were in the newspaper and the contacts with the Palestinian Arabs. These are the people who led them. People like Yaqub Balwoul, Shalom Darwish, Abraham Obedia, Shaul Bar Hayim, Yaqub Khazma, Naim Qattan in Canada, Eli Khadouri in England, Nassim Rajwan, Mir Ma'alem, and so on. It's a list huge, but it shows the richness of the intellectual of Iraq. I hope I basically mentioned most of them, but there are other people who stayed in Iraq, like Saleh Naim Tweg, Salim Al-Bassoon, Murad Al-Imari, Jack Shaul, Salman Darwish, Malih Hashayiq, and Miriam Al-Mullah. In Iraq 52 to 67, Iraqi Jewish presence did not end with the Tasqit. Life stayed, 95% left, but there's still. In 1952, we talk about 8,000. In 1957, we have the census 5,000. In 1967, about 3,000. 74, 400, and 2019, about 6. 1952, 1958, still the kingdom. Stable life, but Jews were not allowed to go to universities. But it's okay. 14th of July, 58, the revolution and the end of the royal regime. Qasim rules, 58 to 63. Jews of Iraq consider it the second golden age for the Jews of Iraq. Equality, the Jews were allowed to travel, the Jews were allowed to go to university, but the Jewish cemetery was destroyed in 1961. February 63, the Ba'athist and nationalist coup d'etat, Qasim killed, and 63 to 68, the nationalist government and discrimination reinstituted. Iraq 67 to 74, Iraqi Jews 3,000 become 74, 2019, Six-Day War 67, July 68, Ba'ath come to power, anti-Jewish measures intensify, imprisonment, torturing, hanging, kidnapping, killing. In summer 70-71, 60% of the remaining of Iraqi Jews escape via Kurdistan, the rest leave by passport from autumn to 1971, and that is the end of the Galut. So let's talk about the three pioneers, which a lot of people know about them because they're actually from the period of the 1920s and 30s. Anwar Shaul and Meir Basri. Anwar Shaul was a journalist, novelist, poet, translator, publisher, lawyer, businessman. He was born in Hilla, descendant of Sheikh Sassoon Saleh, studied in Ta'awun and Alliance School, one of the first graduate of law school in Baghdad, 1931, editor of the Masbah and founder and publisher of Al-Hasid, 29 to 38. Pioneer of short stories in Iraq and the Arab world, he wrote Ali and Usam, first Iraqi film, translator of dozens of stories from English to French. He was legal advisor to the Royal Treasury and to Iraqi Jews communal bodies. He even served in the army, established a printing house and managed it from 1945 to 1960. After the closure of the business, he restarted writing and publishing, and a poem he wrote saved Meir Basri in 1969. We will talk about that. He left Iraq in 1971, where he was received with accolade by the Iraqi Jews, and published his memoirs, My Life in Wadi Rafidain, and poetry collection, A New Dawn Arose, Bazagh al-Fajr, Fajrun Jadid. And the first book is actually My Life in Wadi Rafidain. The first book was published by the Association of Jewish Academics from Iraq, which was founded by Shmuel Moreh, Zichron Levracha. These are number of the books that been published by Anwar Shaul. Some of them translation. He actually translated William Tell, and it was played in Shamash School in 1931. Meir Basri, a prolific writer and novelist, poet, historian, diplomat, community leader. Descendant of the Dangur, he was the grandson of Chief Rabbi Hacham Ezra Dangur, educated in Ta'awun and Alliance, fluent in Arabic, French, English, Hebrew, and conversant in literature and poetry in these 4 languages. He studied independently economics and contemporary literature. He joined the Foreign Ministry and co-founded Baghdad Chamber of Commerce and served its secretary for years, as well as publishing and editing its monthly magazine. Wrote in the economic section of the 1936 Guide to Iraq and Arabic in English. Member of the board and chairman of several communal Jewish bodies over 30 years, wrote dozens of articles, translation, and published many books. Imprisoned for almost 2 months and released in instruction of Mehdi Saleh Hammaj due to basically a poem that Anwar Shaul wrote and eventually was passed to Mehdi Hammaj, but we don't have the time to talk about that. In 1971, he became the head of the Jewish community after the death of Hacham Sison Khlouri. In 1974, he left Iraq and settled in London, where he lived until his death in 2006. From his home, he published several biographical books and memoir, My Life from the Banks of Dikla to the Thames Valley, which actually also was published by the Association of Jewish Academics. The books published by Meir Basri, these are sample of the books that have been published. Dozens of books were published by him. Now we go to what I will call them the 3 musketeers. These are also men of letter. All of them, by the way, wrote poetry, wrote novels, wrote articles to anything, but they are known for being journalism. They're best known as journalists working for leading newspaper of Iraq, and with other contemporaries who left in Israel, they dominated the press. They are Saleh Naim Tuwaid, Salim al-Bassoon, my father, and Murad al-Imari. Not much written about them in Israel because most of their lives they were journalists and stayed in Iraq after the Tasqit. Most of the articles are buried in dozens of newspapers. They were liberal writers, proud of being Iraqis, very courageous in their writing when they were in their 20s and 30s in their own, and as they got older, they wrote in pseudonyms or under no names, as also the situation in Iraq changed. They worked in many cases, and the chief editors of the newspaper, nothing went out to print without their authorization. They knew every politician and intellectual under the sun in Iraq for over 30 to 40 years. All of them were all political prisoners during their career, with Salim al-Bassoon basically more than other people in years spent in prison and exile. All of them, they stayed in Iraq and left in early 70s to Israel. They were close friends and their families. Saleh Naim Tuwaid graduated from the Alliance School in 1934, started journalism in the Ahali, and after closure in other newspapers, amongst them Al-Mabda, Sawt al-Ahali, Sada al-Ahali, Al-Tariq, Al-Ray al-Am, Al-Hawadith, and finally Al-Zaman. One of the early pioneers of translating news and articles from foreign radio and in newspaper from French, English during World War II. Remember, there were no recorders. Translated into Arabic many of the classical French literature writers, from Balzac to Victor Hugo to Anatole France, Molière. Published many of his short stories in 30, then focused on journalism. Joined Kamel Chadirchi Nationalist Democratic Party in 1946 and was close to him and wrote many of his political speeches. After the 1963 coup d'etat, he left journalism but continued his contact with Chadirchi, invited to co-write his political sensitive memoirs. Chadirchi was one of the main politicians in Iraq. For loyalty and hard work, he was awarded by Chadirchi in not mentioning his name, but referring to him as one of the editors. After leaving journalism, he worked as an accountant in one of the private companies. In 1973, he came to Israel and wrote in Al-Anba newspaper a series of articles under the heading Memoirs and Reflection and the Influence of Jewish Citizens on Modern Iraqi Society. He also wrote for the Israeli broadcast, and a book of his memoirs was actually, and articles was published by the Association of Jewish Academics in 2012. Salim al-Bassoon attended the Alliance and Shamash School and the Tafayud Evening Secondary School. He started working at the age of 16 in 1943 at Shihab newspaper and arrested a few months later for sending anti-government poem to the Lebanese Al-Tariq. After he was released, he worked and published articles and poetry in a newspaper. In 1946, he joined Kamil Chadurchi Nationalist Democratic Party, and when Abdel Fattah Ibrahim founded the National Union Party, he joined him and became editor of its newspaper, As-Siyasa and Sawt Al-Siyasa, as well as Al-Watan after its merger with Aziz Sharif People Party. This illustrates to you how actively they were in the political life of Iraq. In 1948, he published Al-Istiqlal on behalf of its owner and wrote strong anti-government article against Saleh Jabr Portsmouth Treaty exposing parliamentary election fraud. Nationalist newspaper like Al-Nahda and Al-Yaqza published article against him, calling him regularly for shutting his mouth and breaking the pen of this Zionist Jew. May 1948, he was arrested and after a short trial was sentenced to exile in Bedra for a year, followed by 2 months in prison. After being released, he worked in Al-Sha'b from 1954 as editor in Bilad. After the revolution in 1958, he worked as a chief editor in 2 newspapers, Al-Ray Al-Am, owned by Al-Jawahiri and Al-Akhbar, and imprisoned in 1959 for 2 months following the Ba'ath attempt to assassinate Qasim. Following 1963 coup d'etat, he left journalism to work in a private company. In 71-73, he returned to journalism, writing articles for Al-Ta'akhi, the Kurdish newspaper, and the weekly Al-Rasid. In 72-73, he wrote the manuscript of his book Al-Jawahiri, His Voice, My Pen, and took it to Israel to stay as a manuscript for 40 years. In 1973, he left Iraq to Israel. After more than 25 years of journalism, Bassoon worked in and wrote for over 40 newspapers and magazines. In Israel, he worked in Israeli radio and for Anba until he became ill in 1980. His book on Al-Jawahiri was published in Iraq in 2013, the first book by an Israeli-Iraqi writer with the support of the Ministry of Culture. Murad Al-Imari, born in Amara city and studied in Alliance Israelite Primary and in Sunniya schools in 1939. After 1 year teaching, he left Amara to Baghdad to work in the railways, then joined law school, but was not allowed to finish after writing article on fascism in law school. Worked in the Iraqi radio news as announcer in 44 into 46 and resigned for refusing to read false report on the killing of Shaul Tweg during demonstration. In 1945, he joined Chadurchi National Democratic Party, leaving it in 1950. And in 1946, he started working in a Sha'b newspaper and a Rabita magazine and Al-Ahali newspaper of the National Democratic until 1951, as well as in the French Jewish Agency. These are the books which published, and sorry, just In 1952, he was arrested with the leader of opposition and party and journalist. After his release, he started working for Iraqi Times in English, having vowed not to work again for an Arabic newspaper. Following the coup d'etat of 8 February 1963, he was arrested for 3 months. After that, he was freed. He left journalism to work also in a car importer. Left in Israel in 1971 and started working in Israeli broadcasting till his retirement in 1996. And a book of poetry collection and biography was published in 2011, selection of the poetry of Murad Al-Imari. 5 دقائق? Okay, come on. These are books published by the 3 authors, the Qira'at wa Khawatir Murad Al-Imari and the Jawahiri Bilisani wa Biqalami. The Qira'at wa Khawatir published in Israel 2011, Murad Al-Imari in Israel 2012, and the one Jawahiri Bilisani wa Biqalami in Iraq 2013. It's a parallel life, as you can see, and destiny of those 3 people. Publication in Iraq about these intellectuals. You see, all these books appeared in the last few years about the 5 of them: Mir Basri, Anwar Shaoud, Salim al-Bassoon, and Murad and Naim. Just to give you an example of how the Iraqis are interesting, this was from a London exhibition in March. You see in the pictures Anwar Shaul, Mir Basri, and Salim al-Bassoon, my father. In fact, by the way, his picture was beside Abdul Karim Qasim. So the question is really, these are people who really not that much known in Israel. In Iraq, they are very much proud of them, and they are basically publishing articles and books of them about their pioneering work in every single aspect. Maybe it's time for us in Israel also to recognize some of these people.
יש שאלות?